So, hi everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Apologies, we're a couple of minutes late starting. That is my technical issues. Welcome to the Theatre Green Book International webinar on Thinking Green for Digital. I think quite a few of you will have come along to previous sessions, but for anyone who hasn't, Theatre Green Book has been running a series of webinars across the kind of beginning of this year. The idea is to sort of do some deep dives in particular areas around sustainability. So today is, of course, about digital. And this is the 7th webinar in our series. So we're kind of coming towards the end. And thank you to anyone who's joined previous ones. I'm Laura, I'm producer for the Theatre Green Book. And just to start with a very quick bit of housekeeping, captioning is available via Zoom. So if anyone would like that, if you click on the More button at the bottom with the ... there's a button with 2 C's in, and you can get captions through that. We are recording today's session. That's just because quite a lot of people aren't able to make it along, so we share it with international partners who are packed on different time zones. And we ask, just because there's quite a lot of people here, please stay on mute while our speakers are talking, but feel free to pop questions in the chat as you think of them. Thank you very much to people who submitted questions in advance. We're going to hear from our speakers, but we will then come to those. And I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to the Arts Council England, whose funding allows us to present these webinars. And very briefly, I'm just going to hand over to Tim to introduce himself, my colleague Tim.
Yes, hello everybody.
Tim, can you hear me?
I can, yeah, hopefully you can hear me. I'm Tim Wood. I'm a communications consultant working with Theatre Green Book, and I'm here today as tech support, which is a proper grand name for what I'm doing. But if you do have any issues with hearing what everybody's saying or seeing the right content or anything that's going wrong with your Zoom link, if you send me a message, I will try. I make no promises, but I will try and resolve that for you.
Lovely. Thanks, Tim. So we're joined today by Josie Dale-Jones, Kate. Sorry, Kate, I haven't actually practiced saying your surname, but hopefully you can introduce yourself in a moment. From Supercool, and Hannah Clutton. So Josie is a theatre maker and producer, and Josie, before it closed, was the co-director of Staging Change, which some of you might have come across in the past, who, amongst many other things, were part of a larger group involved in the early stages of the creation of Theatre Green Book. And Josie has written case studies, toolkits for the Theatre Green Book, in particular the digital toolkit, which is going to talk a bit more about today. And Josie, with other hats, has also worked for Complicité as project producer, and as Complicité's Green Champion, and also has taken roles in Culture Declares Emergency and the Theatre Green Book International Touring Sustainability Group, so knows lots about Theatre Green Book and its various resources. Kate is the strategy director at Supercool, which some of you might have come across already, but they are a digital design agency which builds websites for the culture sector. And Kate's had a very varied career doing all sorts of things, including ticketing and fundraising roles and strategy and consulting roles across the cultural sector. And in 2022 completed an MBA focusing on digital sustainability. And Kate's going to be talking to us about a variety of things, but particularly around website impact. And Hannah Clutton is a sustainability and data AI consultant, and is a sustainability technology consultant at a company called Avanade, and is super passionate about using data and AI in a sustainable way. So looking forward to hearing from all of you. And we're going to hand over to each speaker to start with. So I'm going to hand over to you, Josie, if that's all right.
Hello. I'm aware I'm probably coming at this from like the opposite angle, but let's go for it. I'm here as a theatre maker, producer, and I guess that's how I got into sustainability rather than the other way around. So I run a theatre company called This Egg, and I make shows that are rooted in some kind of social justice or the hope for some kind of change. And it was as I was producing that work that I realised that the message and impact can be outside of the show as much as in the content of the show itself. And sustainability felt like a really clear example of this. So thinking about making shows where they were talking about the climate emergency or the living crisis, and wondering what we could do differently and in a more climate conscious way when we're making them. And then in 2022, I was commissioned by the British Council as part of their creative commissions to create an international project for COP27. And this was a project that had previously been a live performance that I'd been working on that was, COVID stopped. And it turned into a digital project. So a little bit of background about that project, because that's how I got onto doing the toolkit, is Mother Earth was born out of a feeling of apathy around the world burning, and was an attempt to get audiences to feel something again. And the sort of change from the live performance into the digital meant that we were working internationally and remotely, and the product that we were making, product in quotation marks, horrible word, I think, when we're talking about art, was a project made by people in 9 different countries, and it was a dance, film and podcast series. And digital was not, and still isn't, an expertise of mine, I wouldn't say, but as someone that has always been interested in cross art form performance, as well as trying to green my practice, I was curious to learn more, and especially when our impact and footprint feels invisible when it comes to digital, both in the making and the consumption of it. And as someone who learns through doing, that's what I did. So I don't know if that resonates with anybody here, but hopefully it does in one way or another. So for me, environmental sustainable working is about the decision-making processes, the choices that we're making, and being able to understand why we're making them. And what we really needed on this project was information that would help us set some goals and standards and hold ourselves accountable. And at the time, it didn't feel like that existed in very simple terms. And often in a team, I work with someone specifically on environmental sustainability, sort of as a consultant or someone to support the process from the outside and hold me and other people accountable. And Eleanor Waugh is someone who I work with a lot to do this. And for this project, Ellie and me decided that we'd focus our sort of practice, but also like we were writing a case study at the same time for Theatre Green Book, and we wanted to make it about digital international working. So we collected data, like the number of video calls and hours spent online, to help us understand the impact of a project like Mother Earth. And obviously on reflection, there was loads that we could have done better. So we sort of wrote about that to share it and hope that other people don't make the same mistakes we did. But that's then when we developed the digital toolkit for the Theatre Green Book, from all of the learnings from that. And the toolkit, in brief, aims to bring consciousness to decision-making processes and provide sustainable alternative practices. And I guess it was a real, like, a making of something that sort of we wish that we'd had at our fingertips, because we did a lot of Googling, like, how do we do this? How do we do that? But actually, there's so much information out there. And as, again, like a theatre maker that doesn't necessarily have a digital background, a lot of it felt really impenetrable, and the language was quite difficult. And I really just was like craving to have like a list of things and someone to sort of, I mean, we all want people just to tell us, like, which way is the greener way? So it's an attempt to sort of at least, distill some of that information in some way. And I'm sure I can send a link to the toolkit, so I won't go through the whole thing, but in there we go through the creation of digital work. We go through choices that you can make around like email and web management, how to have hybrid, like online, offline meetings, and when actually it might be best not to bother doing the online bit. And also design and technical equipment. I think with digital, again, like there's so much carbon footprint in the actual kit that we're using. And then specific to sort of filming and shooting, as well as data storage and editing. And then we also briefly talk about distributing, so how to host some digital content and what guidance you might also give an audience when they are consuming what you've made. But I'm sure Kate and Hannah have got much more detailed information on all of those things, basically. But yeah, that's a brief background into me and the toolkit.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Josie. I've got some follow-up questions, but I'll come to those later on. But that's fantastic. Thank you. Kate, should we go over to you next, please?
Oh,
thank you very much.
You can't see my slide. Lovely to see everybody. So a quick introduction. I'm Kate Mroczkowski. I'm honestly not fussy how anybody says my surname, or just Kate is absolutely fine. I'm Strategy Director at Sedgwick, where we build websites for arts, cultural and heritage organisations. As an organisation, we've focused a lot on our impact on the planet over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. We offset everything that we do, so we are measuring our operational carbon footprint through our lived lives, but also all the work that we do. So when we build a website, we have, it is estimated like a lot of these things, but we have a reasonable idea of what the carbon footprint of the build of that website is, and we offset that through funding projects. But I wanted to cover first, so why does digital sustainability matter? Some of you might be here thinking, I haven't even thought about this stuff, and some of you will have already done quite a lot of research into this. We obviously know that there's a climate emergency, but we're seeing an increase in digital activity and data and how much there is of it. And the way in which AI is being adopted is also going to have an impact. I know Hannah will probably talk quite a bit more about that. It's estimated that by 2040, the internet will contribute to 14% of global greenhouse emissions. And that is more than the emissions created by the transportation sector. So whilst we're worrying about whether we should get the train or fly somewhere or walk somewhere, actually our use of the internet and the internet itself has a much bigger impact. Every website has a carbon footprint, whether you're thinking about it or not. The average carbon footprint of a website is 0.5 of a gram. So that's of a page view, not a website. So each time somebody goes to one of your pages and has a look at it on the website, it's 0.5 of a gram. Now, this varies considerably. We at Supercool are just coming to the end of a period of research where we've analysed 66 cultural organisation websites and tracked the carbon footprint of those websites over a period of 3 months. We're releasing that in a couple of weeks. So we're seeing real variety here. But even if you're on the lower end of that scale at 0.5 grams, we estimate that the average cultural website has about 2.8 million page views a year. For us, this ranges from a few tens of thousands to some of our websites reaching 19, 20 million page views a year. This is a huge amount of carbon footprint and is actually the equivalent of, I think it's around 35 flights a year from London to Paris. So it could be that your cultural organisation's website is having a really hefty impact on the planet without you really being aware of it. It's worth noting as well that audiences really care as well. So the Act Green reports that Indigo did that looked into audiences' expectations in terms of the climate emergency, 50% of cultural audiences expect you to make changes to your website to decrease the carbon footprint. I think this is actually really high when we consider that some people won't even have an awareness that there is much of a carbon footprint for digital technologies. And 85% of under 35-year-olds expect cultural organisations to have a responsibility and to influence society to make radical change. I think what's really interesting with this is if you go down the route of reducing your carbon footprint of your digital activity, there's real opportunity here to engage with your audiences and tell them about it. And it can lead to increased brand perceptions, buy-in, engagement. You will engage with younger audiences. There's so many benefits that you would get by simply talking about and doing this work. It's really complicated, but I'm going to touch very briefly on what creates a digital carbon footprint. So it's often split into two areas. So we have the operational energy and the embodied energy. So operational energy refers to the energy consumed while the device or piece of network infrastructure is in use. So for you, that's whilst your website is in use. So whilst end users are going to your website and exploring the content, it's whilst you're updating content, publishing news stories, updating the homepage, that's your operational energy. The embodied energy refers to the energy consumption, such as the energy required for equipment manufacture, assembly, or disposal. And so one of the things that you can do is you can work with partners who are doing something like us and offsetting that kind of essentially the embodied energy, the energy it takes to create your website, but you also have a lot of control over that operational energy. The way in which the impact is created is roughly split into four areas. Now, this data is quite old, and maybe Hannah's got some more recent data, but finding solid numbers on this is incredibly difficult, but I still think this is valid and useful. This is data from 2017 from Greenpeace, and we can see that a large chunk of the energy used is through devices. That's the energy used by devices. And we also have networks as well. That's a really significant chunk. And that's the energy used to deliver the data you have on your website to your end users. And we have data centers down here as well. And I think with the adoption of AI, we might see that increase quite dramatically over the next few years. There's a lot of talk of the amount of energy that AI uses. It's great because it's building awareness within the general public of the impacts of digital technologies, but there are also going to be some real challenges with that. And so what can you do now? What are the things that if you were to just go back to your desk after this webinar and think about? I've listed three things. So one thing you can do is store as little as possible on the servers. So really that's about getting rid of your old content, the content that's no longer used, the content that isn't relevant anymore. So many cultural websites are full of news posts about on-sale announcements and cast announcements and new team members and things like that, which might be 5-6 years old that just aren't relevant anymore. Also consider removing all of the old images. So whether they're old images of shows, of productions, you probably have those stored on a shared drive somewhere, so you don't really need them on your website as well. And you could reduce the amount of power needed to view a web page. The way to do this is to reduce the amount of heavy content, the data that's on the page. And this is really about using image and video content with caution. And you can also talk to your web developers about measuring that and reducing it. And the other thing that I would recommend is moving to green hosting. Again, you might not have control over this yourself, but an email to your web developers to say you want to start making the move to green hosting providers is a great thing that you can do, and that will significantly benefit your website. I have a few useful resources which I will pop in the chat. Digital Carbon Online, who have collaborated with us on the Cultural Sustainability Benchmark Report, offer a free service where you can get the top 50 pages of your website tested for their carbon footprint. You can also test individual web pages with the Website Carbon tool. We've got a landing page on our website that's full of resources specifically around digital sustainability. And I'll pop a link into our mailing list there as well, because, just a small plug, our report is coming out on the 9th of July. And as I said, we've looked at the carbon footprint of 66 cultural websites. And even though I look at this stuff every day, I was still kind of blown away by the carbon footprint of those websites in just 3 months. And I can't even begin to fathom the amount of carbon footprint that we collectively have as a sector in terms of our websites. The nice thing about that is because it's a benchmark report, you'll be able to use those tools I've mentioned in the resources and compare your website to the report to help you get an idea of what good looks like, and where to focus your energy and kind of where to focus those improvements. That's it from me.
Thanks very much, Kate. I said do some questions later, but actually, Katie at the Old Vickers just popped one in that's quite specific to your presentation, so I just thought I'd ask it now, which was in the network section. I think it was on the Greenpeace slide. Does that include local area networks within own buildings, like all the cabling and usage you have within an office?
Do you know what? I'm not 100% sure. I think it probably does. If you're running that network throughout your building, there will be energy used there. I'm not sure in terms of how you could improve the efficiencies with that. In terms of websites, what you can do is use content delivery networks, which essentially store the data closer to the end user. So if your servers are based in London, for example, and you have users in France, a content delivery network will allow that data to be stored physically closer to that end user. Hannah might have a better idea of kind of networks in buildings. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure of that one. Sorry, Katie, it's not a great answer.
Yeah, I mean, I could add to that. I think when we're talking about networks, it's about the amount of energy and resistance that almost gets generated because you're passing data from one place to another. And when you're transmitting that information, it's moving through the grid, essentially, from the point where you're collecting it all the way to the point where you're consuming it. And carbon accounting, in terms of trying to articulate what energy consumption is in terms of carbon emissions, is essentially you take energy consumption in kilowatt per hours and you apply a factor to it. So it would be based upon whatever your energy consumption is on your meter within that building, which would include, I'm imagining, those networks that you're using. But I mean, to also kind of caveat all of the statistics around emissions and emission reporting, it's all a massive estimate in today's world. You know, it's not like financial accounting where you can get as accurate as like to the pence. We're using estimations based on science, and they continue to evolve year on year. We find the ones that fit our situation best, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a complete accurate view of what you've got in your building, let's say.
Thanks, Hannah. To follow on from that, do you want to launch in, maybe introduce a little bit more about yourself and what Avanade do, and then and your presentation?
Yeah, let me try sharing my screen. Hopefully this is going to work. Maybe I can do the entire screen. Is that going to share? And then from the beginning, can you see that now?
Yeah, great.
Perfect.
Perfect.
I mean, it's lovely to follow on from both Kate and Josie. They made some really, really good points, and I hope that in kind of my brief presentation today, I can maybe build on top of a few of those points and bring some of it to life through some examples. So I work for a technology consultancy called Avanade. We're quite large, but most people have never heard of us. We're about 60,000 people globally, and we really focus on delivering Microsoft services to all sorts of customers. And we're kind of co-owned by Microsoft and Accenture. So in my role, I'm really in data and AI, but I focus on sustainability, and that spans two main areas. I'd say it's using data and AI products or technologies to enable better care of the environment and the planet and our societies, but also thinking more about what is the impact of those digital solutions. So trying to reduce the impact of any digital solution that we're creating for our customers. So we've learned a little bit. Can you see the whole screen, or is that pop-up annoying? No, there we go. So I mean, Kate's touched on what we talk about in terms of sustainability, mostly thinking through the lens of emissions. Obviously, there are other things to think about with the social and governance aspect that maybe gets talked about less. I'll also kind of speak to predominantly emissions today. But with all of that, I think a really good question to ask yourself at the start of all of this is, what is material and where's your maturity at? And that's something that we typically do with our customers when we're trying to think strategically around sustainability. So when I talk about materiality, it's trying to understand what areas of your business are having a significant impact on, let's say, your overall carbon footprint. If I was to take a oil and gas company as an example, really the heavy hitters for them are the oil that they're extracting, and the vessels and the machines that they're using are consuming a lot of energy and causing damage to the natural environment. So that's very material for them, and therefore they might want to think about switching to renewables. Whereas a law firm, or perhaps some of your organizations, they're using lots of paper, they've got a lot of data stored on their servers, as we were kind of mentioning earlier. So maybe digital sustainability is a larger proportion of their overall carbon footprint, and they should start there. So that's a bit of an idea of what materiality is. You can think about it also as having a financial risk for your organization, as well as an operational risk, but also an opportunity. As Kate was saying, maybe if you were to green certain areas of your operation, that's a market differentiator for you, and therefore there will be associated revenue for your business too. And then the other kind of side of the coin is maturity. So maturity is a little bit more fluffy, I would say. It's harder to define, but it's thinking about how far you really are along in that journey when it comes to integrating sustainability across all areas of your business. I think like the categorization of maturity kind of changes depending on the different customers that we're working with. But I really liked kind of these, what is it here? 1, 2, 3, 4 sort of categories. There's people who are, you know, compliant driven. So they're forced to think about sustainability because there's regulations that are being enforced on them and fines being enforced on them. Efficiency focused organizations because they understand that higher energy usage means higher impact. They want to reduce their energy usage to lower the costs, which lowers their emissions. Strategically proactive, maybe they've already defined their targets and they're working towards it because they see it as a differentiator for them. And then lastly, purpose driven, and those are the organizations that they exist because they're a sustainable product. So I don't know, when it comes to a product like period pants, I don't know why that comes to mind, but you know, their whole purpose is that they're reducing waste and they are a sustainable product. So therefore, you know, it's one of the very first things in their mission to think about sustainability across the board. So I'd really advise you today to maybe go away and have a think about this. Think about where you might fit across different areas of your operation, and that can really help you start to take some of the meaningful steps towards mitigating risks and impact around sustainability. And I just wanted to run through a couple of examples. This first one's very hypothetical. A friend of mine actually works at this company. It's how I became aware of it. Might be familiar to some of you, but Studio 20 are a video company for theatre people. So they do a lot of the video creation for shows to either advertise or to take them on live or online or do live performances. So I just had a little bit of a think from my perspective where I think they might be in terms of their materiality across a number of different areas when we think about digital sustainability and maturity. So from a materiality perspective, these categories will be probably quite similar to Kate's, but I broke it down into, you know, your cloud infrastructure, the data that you're processing, application management, so how are you kind of using Teams and emails, website design, and then finally the hardware. And because they're a company with a lot of video content, for me, I would say that, you know, the cloud infrastructure and where they're choosing to host that information has a very material impact of the overall emissions that they're creating. Same with the data storage. They've got large files that they may not be deleting or removing. They may even be using AI to generate some of their content, which again has quite a significant impact. Whereas the application management, the emails that they're sending back and forth, the Teams messages between maybe 3 or 4 employees isn't really going to be as significant. And then the last one maybe that we haven't really talked about is the hardware side of things. As Kate was saying, we have different types of emissions. So embodied emissions for me is really about the emissions associated with the hardware of a product. So in your camera, you could look at the different materials that your camera consists of, and then you think about all of the manufacturing processes that went into generating those materials and also how they'll be disposed of. And we call that kind of product carbon footprinting. And I'm sure this organization has quite a lot of hardware, so it's on the higher side. And then from a maturity standpoint, when looking at their website, I felt as if they don't really have much of a mission around sustainability, but from I kind of categorize them as efficiency focused because of this large amount of content that they have will definitely come with a cost in terms of storage. So they're probably thinking about and reviewing like subscriptions to the cloud or the amount of data they're storing on a SharePoint and trying to reduce it. So that's one example. I'm going to go through one more and then I'll pass back over to Laura. And this is an example of a project that I worked on. It's not so specific to the theatre industry, but here I'm going to walk through kind of some of the reduction initiatives and actions that we took to try and mitigate the digital carbon footprint of this solution. So a few weeks ago, maybe even a month ago now, we were at the Chelsea Flower Show, and we partnered with a garden designer to build one of the show gardens, which was called Avenard's Intelligent Garden. And he came to us with a really interesting narrative around the plight of trees in urban spaces. So about 30% of trees don't survive the first year of their life, and 50% don't survive for 10 years. And we wanted to shine some light on this and also educate individuals, communities about this problem because of climate, resilience and climate adaptation is really essential, especially in cities like London, which is where I live. So my role on the project was to think about how we could reduce that digital carbon footprint. We're very aware of the fact that in this setting as well, we were bringing technology into nature, and that's quite a touchy subject for some. So we wanted to ensure it wasn't having more of an impact than when we would have liked. So from a cloud infrastructure perspective, Kate's already mentioned, you can try and have some control if you have anything in the cloud of where it's stored. And in Microsoft world, they have data centers in the UK Southeast region. So you choose a region, and for us, we chose this region because it was closest to the site of the hardware, which meant that we limited the amount of data that was being sent back and forth. Alternatively, we might have had a cheaper option in somewhere like Asia, but that means potentially higher energy uses and a larger emissions. From a data storage perspective, and this is where I'll come on to AI, because we were using AI in this setting, we were using generative AI. So we were actually using a form of chat GPT, which I'm sure many of you guys tap into and use in your own work. And what it was doing was basically creating a live chatbot, which allows you to talk to the trees, understand how they are, all through data that was being collected about their growth and their health. And when I first talked to the AI engineer, we'd chosen a large language model for our AI analysis. And when we kind of reevaluated our use case, we realized we didn't need something that was so large in terms of the amount of energy that consumed. And actually, we ended up choosing something called GPT-4o Mini, which is a much smaller small language model. It uses a smaller data set. It reduces the amount of energy that it uses every time you prompt it. So those are kind of some of the choices that you can make around AI, as well as considering whether ethically it's the right thing to do and whatnot. We also did other things, like we limited the amount of data we could collect. So maybe in your case, you might want to think about, do you require people to log into a website, and are you going to store user credentials or passwords? Is it essential that you have their addresses and whatnot? Because all of this starts adding up. So for us, we limited the data that we collected to a certain number of sensors and only 12 tree sensors. We also deleted historic data So if we had collected data for the last week, we decided that after the point of 1 week, all of that data was removed, and instead we had a summarized version of it. And that again really reduces the amount of data that you've got on a server. And then from a website design perspective, you can kind of see from some of these photos on the right-hand side, in particular this one, we initially wanted to do almost like a digital twin of the garden. So in the same way that you can walk through a street of Google Maps, to do an equivalent, but for the garden itself. But when I was speaking to the UX and UI designers, you know, having that amount of imagery and user interaction has a very big impact on the amount of energy you're consuming. So instead, we opted for kind of graphics, so graphical representations of trees, and really limited the amount of photos and video we were using. Not only that, but when you actually come to design your website, there's lots of libraries and existing, you know, structures you can use rather than starting from scratch. That's another way to reduce your consumption. And then lastly, on our hardware, I found this really interesting. Maybe not so relevant for the theatre, or maybe it is. Depends what you're creating for your shows. We would build our own hardware, so we built our own sensors. And what we did was we embedded sustainability design principles, and one of those is modular design. So if one piece of that thing breaks, we only replace that one thing. And it's totally opposite to how we live in today's society. If you think you get a laptop, it costs more to replace one part of it or a screen than it does to buy a new one. So how can you maybe start thinking about only changing parts of a piece of hardware rather than all of it, because that generates waste and that has an emissions associated to it. So I think I'll stop there. I'll just give you one resource to go and look at. So all of these principles really that I've spoken to you about were inspired by the Green Software Foundation, and we've collaborated with them to create some of these principles, but on their website they have a whole host of principles that you can follow and try and implement yourself to try and create a greener carbon footprint when it comes to the digital space. So take a look there. They've got lots of working groups and committees you can join as well if you're interested. But yeah, that's it from me. I'll give it back to Laura now.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Cheers for that. That was fascinating. And I'm actually just going to start by jumping back a bit to Josie. Something I just wanted to ask you about from what you were talking about. You mentioned that you and Ellie had done a bit of work thinking about the platforms that you host the digital content on, so how you get it out to your audiences. Could you just talk a little bit more about that? Like, what platforms do you use, and what does that look like to you? Like, how you know, obviously there are some organisations like NT Live who put it into cinemas, but if you're working at a smaller scale, what actual platforms are you using?
Yeah, I guess it's sort of what you've already mentioned there in terms of like who are we collaborating with. So in a similar way to like if we're touring a theatre production, it's like what venues are we working with? It was also sometimes it was a cinema hosting and sometimes it was a theatre venue hosting, because it was in a sort of time where lots of theatres were doing digital and screenings of things. And then we also were thinking about website hosting. So Mother Earth had its own website where all of the films were available. And so then we were thinking about, okay, how do we do green hosting, and what does it mean? What's like streaming versus downloading something? And all of those things have got different impacts and different carbon footprints. And as with everything, there's not like a catch-all that works better. Like some people are like, oh, it's better to use to stream on Wi-Fi. Some people are like, oh, it's better to, if you're on data, to like download. So and also that's UK specific. In other countries there's like other stuff. So like it's all of those things to sort of think through in terms of where you're hosting it. And oh, there was something else I thought there. Oh, I guess it linked quite closely with our audience guidance. So if people were watching at home and watching online, then also it's who's their energy provider and who's and what size screen are they watching on. Like if they're watching, the sort of general rule that we found was like the less people, the smaller the screen that you should be watching on, in terms of like trying to offset as much as possible. And then also like brightness of screen and like how loud you're playing the sound. So it was sort of, it was, the conversation was always about where are we hosting, but then also how is it being digested and how can we, as much as possible, have control over that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. That's really, really interesting. And I was going to say, Josie, just ask you a question that was sent sort of in advance. I asked the audience, the participants, for any sort of pre-questions. So I'll ask this to Josie, but then also maybe jump to Hannah. Somebody said that they'd come up with a strategy to try and reduce their digital carbon footprint. Things like unsubscribing to newsletters, deleting replicated files and emails and so on. But the kind of challenge of you do that once, but how do you keep engaging people? And they've asked, is there a tracker to sort of track these actions and automatically remind staff to perform these actions and so on, so you can kind of keep that going, that behaviour going, and there isn't really, there isn't a Theatre Green Book tracker that helps you do that. But I was just wondering, Josie, I was going to ask a bit how you and Ellie had collected your data and how you kind of continue to remind yourself to keep doing these things, rather than just as a one-off activity.
Do you mean as in, is the question around like what we're measuring and how we're measuring it?
I suppose it's two questions actually. Yeah, one is what are you measuring and how are you measuring it, and then how do you sort of keep your all these conversations and your kind of good behaviour, as it were, going?
I guess, so for example, thinking, okay, we had like X amount of Zoom calls and we were like vigilantly like keeping track of how many Zoom calls is like a useful first step, because you need the data to be able to try to reduce it, right? And then you try the next time to continue collecting the data and then see if you have reduced it or not. And then I guess after that, of course, it is sort of exhausting, and you sort of hope that it's embedded in the culture of an organisation or a project. And I guess like within bigger organizations, because my company really is just me, it's like having it as something that is part of your like weekly meeting or check-in, like sort of saying, and is everyone still doing this, or like, and has any, what are the things that people have struggled with in terms of environmental sustainability within the projects that they're working on this week, for example. I also think that like the practice of like sort of constantly asking the question of like, do I need to do that? Like, we often have the sort of, emails have this amount of carbon, like consider this as a thanks in advance kind of mentality. Like, I think the more that we practice doing it, it becomes natural, but it is like a very intentional beginning to sort of go, okay, do I need to do that thing, or do I need to be on the computer, or in my personal life it's like, do I need the TV on and be looking at my phone, for example, like, and then I'm like, probably not. So it's like, I think it's just constantly just asking yourself, like, is it necessary, is it useful, do I need all of those things?
Great, thank you. And Hannah, I was going to ask you the sort of same question, which is obviously you advise people, you give them that, like that list you were showing us some examples of, as actions people can do. But how do you incorporate that as not just only a one-off element, but an ongoing thing?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think in larger organizations, they probably have access to the data more easily, or they have a reason to be capturing it, and they're forced to set targets, which creates a culture of almost forcing people to. As an example, at Microsoft, they've developed a tool which you literally just have to turn on a button, press a button, and it will tell you all the emissions that are associated with all of the data storage and usage in their cloud. So again, like, they've taken responsibility for it as an enterprise platform. And that's really where my head goes, is we need individuals to think about it, but we also need to ask businesses to take responsibility too. Like, there's a triangle of government, businesses and individuals. So, you know, I think of like Trainline that started actually advertising the emissions that you save. Why can't the same happen for the other applications that you're using within your organization? If enough people start to ask about it, then maybe we'll get access to this data and people are more aware and take some action themselves. But right now, I think it was Josie who kind of said it's a little bit undercover and unknown, especially in the digital world. So maybe we should start, I don't know, create a policy.
Campaign.
I wanted to add very briefly to what you said, Hannah. One thing we do at Supercool, we're a team of 16, so I appreciate we'll be bigger than some of the organisations here, but probably smaller. We audit all of our suppliers and ask them for their sustainability policy. And just asking for that is enough for some suppliers to go, well, we don't quite have that. And we're like, okay, well, you're not the supplier for us then. We'll go to this other organisation. Even if the other organisation hasn't achieved everything yet, the fact that they have something in place means they're going to be further along and they're at least trying. And I think that fits with that kind of organisation, government, individual. It's what can you do as an individual to push those other bits of the triangle to make change?
Fab. Thanks very much, Kate. And actually, Kate, I had another question for you. I just wanted to pick up on your, you mentioned, which I thought was really nice, the idea of actually this can be kind of a thing you engage audiences on, of sustainability in general, but maybe particularly with digital sustainability. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts or had seen any examples of ways people had done that in a kind of exciting way.
Yeah, so the Act Green report that Indigo did also asked audiences whether they would expect to see some kind of accreditation on a website, and they would, and they asked where that would be, and people said in the footer or in the purchase path somewhere. So I think having just that accreditation, whether it's the website carbon widget, which tells you what the carbon footprint of each page load is, whether it's something in your footer that links to the work you're doing to be sustainable, I think that's really valuable. There were two organisations, so Chichester Festival Theatre and Unicorn Theatre in London. They're both really great at talking about what they're doing from a sustainability point of view. And I think there's a lot to be said for incorporating that message in your storytelling and your kind of blog or your news. It's not just about what's happening on the stage. It's also talking about the work you're doing, whether it is kind of reducing food waste or whether it's an overhaul of your website to reduce the carbon footprint of it. And I think having a place and a platform to talk about what you're doing on the website is really useful, and it will encourage more people to engage with you. I recommend having a look at the Act Green report. I'll pop a link in the footer, but essentially audiences are going to like you more and spend more with you if you are demonstrating that you're working on this stuff. It's not about achieving everything, but if you demonstrate you care and it's part of your values, you will get more audiences through the doors.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Kate. And just to, you mentioned the widget that is at the bottom of the website. For anyone who hasn't seen that, that's like a thing that says this is how much CO2 this page uses. I can't remember how you get that widget, Kate. Is it through one of the links you've already posted?
Yes, it's through website. Carbon. It's completely free. You might need to ask, well, you will need to ask your web developer to pop it on the page. One thing you can do, we put it in most of the footers on our website, but you can actually get an embeddable widget. So if you can embed stuff on a web page, you can probably just put it in yourself.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Sorry, I'm just having a look at Katie's comment she's put in the chat, and also I should mention this for anyone who can't see the chat. Vamos Theatre have given an example of they've got a fortnightly 30 minutes in their office calendar for people to go through and look at data and delete emails and so on. So that's a really nice practical idea. So I was reading Katie's comment when it comes to SharePoint. updating data retention policies to be more accurate would help with both GDPR and large amounts of data. An issue we come up against is people wanting to keep hold of a lot of data from a just in case perspective. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I don't know, Hannah, whether you sort of come across this at all. Perhaps it's something of kind of the culture around nobody wanting to throw anything away.
Yeah. I think everyone lives in fear of not being able to find that thing that they need to find. But you're right, like GDPR states that you've got to get rid of certain identifiable data by a point in time. So also, why not extend it to other parts of your organization and other data that you have? I think, was it Katie referenced SharePoint, which I work with a lot more than other kind of OneDrive. And in your settings, there will be options around what you choose to retain. Same goes for Teams. I know now for me, like my Teams messages at work all auto-delete after a month. And you can kind of implement some of those things into your organization to take back control, because I think often it feels like we're not in control. Just a little bit of research has to be done to understand what a data retention policy is and how do I change it. Or even, when are the downtimes for the applications that are using? I'm very used to speaking that language because we build things for people, and I will always ask the customer, can we turn this off between midnight and 6 a.m.? Like, is anyone actually going to use it? And often the answer is no, they won't. So we'll turn everything off during that period of time, which both saves them cost, but also impact on the environment.
Brilliant. And I'm just going to keep, I've got a couple more questions, but if anyone has anything else they really want to ask, you pop it in the chat. Sorry, Hannah, I have one more thing for you. You just mentioned earlier that Microsoft had a sort of built-in button. Sorry, do you mean that's something publicly available on SharePoint to show you the data storage, or is that more than behind the scenes?
No, so it will be linked to something called an Azure account. I'm not sure if everyone would have one of them through a SharePoint usage, but I can look into it, and I can kind of share a link. Maybe larger organizations that do use Azure, which is the cloud, will have that option available to them. And it's essentially a dashboard which will show you your emissions usage over time, and apportion it to storage, but also usage as well.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's really helpful. I think a lot of data organizations do use SharePoint and Microsoft tools, so I think that'll be used quite a lot as well. Kate, I just wanted to ask you, I don't know, sorry, it's a siren. I don't know how much your detail you'll be able to give on this, because I know it's such a thorny topic, so I'm asking you a difficult question. I apologize, but you mentioned about the calculating and thinking about the embodied energy of the equipment that you're using. I just wondered if you had any insights, or with some statistics you were showing of how people get that information, because it's not always very easy to get that information out of, you go and buy a laptop for your office. How do you find out that kind of information?
I mean, like Hannah said, it is nearly impossible to find highly accurate information. If you do find the information, it's going to be estimated. There are some platforms that have a kind of CO2 equivalents and things like that. And I think, I'm sure I've seen some manufacturers start to share some of this information, but I don't have it to hand. I think it can be so challenging to find that information. Instead of worrying about the exact carbon footprint of some of those pieces of equipment, thinking about the kind of lifetime of that equipment, the repairability of that equipment, only buying refurbished equipment in the first place, taking that approach, will reduce your carbon footprint. It doesn't make it that much easier for carbon reporting if you want to report on that carbon footprint, but going down that approach of using that kind of that reuse, recycle, circular economy approach to your hardware would definitely reduce the carbon footprint. Hannah, I don't know if you know of anywhere that has reliable information on that.
On the emissions that are being generated?
From the embodied energy.
So embodied.
equipment and assembly and disposal?
Yeah, I do. I've done a couple of projects which are around product lifecycle analysis. It can get very complicated, so it depends how detailed you want to go and how worthwhile that level of detail is to your organization, going back to maturity and materiality. There's some, basically you've got to purchase some data sets, which are emission factor libraries, and they are factors for lots of different types of materials. So for example, a very specific type of plastic will have an emission factor associated to that. You can look at all the components of your hardware and then come up with a view on what its embodied carbon is. But I think, you know, it may not be, you've got to think, is this worth doing? Or do I need to know the information in order to take action? Because we end up in a bit of a like catch-22 situation often, where we live in quite a data-driven world and we want proof in order to take action. But if we wait for proof, then we'll never take action. So I think I would more just at times think logically about the situation and take steps that are within your own means to take action now, rather than trying to spend lots of time, energy, and effort on figuring out whether it's going to do better or have like a 25% return on investment or something. Yeah.
That's fab. Thanks, Hannah. And given we're in the last minute, I'm just going to wrap up. And I think that's a really good place to end, actually, is on that thing of, you know, yes, we can worry about tracking, and as we've discussed, and Hannah and Kate in particular have talked about, it's so difficult to know tangible answers on some of these things, but that doesn't mean we can't not make change. And I just wanted to end by, a couple of people asked in the pre-questions, you know, what's the best way to get started, how to get newbies involved to start acting? And my answer to that would be, my sort of basic answer to that would be, please do take a look at the Theatre Green Book toolkit that Josie has pulled together. It's a really good overview and a great place to start. So if you're looking even for just some kind of, you know, the first points to start sharing with your colleagues, this is all kind of new to you, I'd really recommend taking a look there. But it's 4 o'clock, so I wanted to finish up and say thank you so much to our speakers and their time and expertise, and thank you to everyone for joining and your questions. And hopefully see you all again at some point, but have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you very much, everyone.